wayfinding problems. And internships, it was still the same thing. I interned at ASI and the lab. That's also event signage, marketing materials, a little bit of motion graphics. We did apparel design, stuff like that. And so, yeah, so school had a heavy emphasis at that time on print work. And also, you know, internships and full-time work since then has been a lot about print work. So the next slide, this is just a little bit of a preview of some of the internship work I did. And I want to kind of talk about how the small things that I got from these internships and work is how I kind of got to where I am today. So sorry, I'm gonna switch to, okay. So during internships, I experimented and explored different mediums of creating my designs. What I kind of forced myself to do was not rely a lot on digitally creating as much of my designs as possible. And with that, I would churn out a lot of interesting concepts that you can't really get through digital work. And that gave me a way to kind of creatively figure out how to, you know, get that type of like illusion without using too much of my computer. And then after internships, I was working at the lab. Switch to next one. Working at the lab, I had a lot of emphasis in, and I leaned heavy into hand lettering and illustration during my time at the lab. And so what I did with this is I kind of pushed myself to adopt different styles and techniques for hand lettering and illustration. But again, everything here was basically all about marketing and print-based projects. So with that, I kind of got really, really exhausted with creative design. And so in the next slide, I kind of show, like, I kind of took a little bit of introspective look into what I enjoyed most about design. And it kind of took me 10 years to kind of really understand the answer to that question. What I loved most was the design process. So the research, the concepting, connecting the dots, finding, you know, like how this relates to your concept and the solution, exploring varieties of methods of execution, figuring out how things work, you know, strategic problem solving, and like I really enjoyed the documentation of things. So in the next slide, you kind of have a little preview of my notebooks that I would have, and this is where I enjoyed most of it. So discovering, you know, concepting different ways to do things, discovering research-based concepts and all that. I was all about learning new skills. So it was a very much like kind of deconstructing how the process works is where I found a lot of my enjoyment with design, and not so much the end process of it, or the end result of it. So in the next slide, you can see that, you know, a lot of my work would produce, you know, all these different graphics. And what I enjoyed a lot was the documentation of it. And so like the creation of the design elements, so that it would be easier for me to adapt these to different collaterals and all that. Because we would have really huge signage, we would have Facebook posts, we would have like, you know, the different digital collateral that we need to adapt it to. And so just having this all organized was great. So this is what kind of brought me into the world of design systems within UX. Design systems. So what is design systems? So design systems is kind of a comprehensive set of standards and documentation with reusable components that kind of guide the design and development of products within an organization, right? And when you're looking at this photo example, you're thinking, isn't this just branding? Because you're kind of documenting like color styles, the typography styles, and all that. It's kind of like branding, but a little more swole. Yeah, so it's kind of like branding, but with design systems, you're creating reusable UI elements, right? So it's for designers to kind of individually have your own usage guidelines, interaction patterns, and kind of best practices of do's and don'ts. So you, like, if you guys have any experience in like branding so far for any of your classes, you'll know that like this is how you correctly use our logo or not correctly use our logo and all that. So it's kind of like that. But the main goal of it is to help increase efficiency for not just the designers, but also on the developer side. And so with design systems, my duties in owning this design system includes the build of every element, the governance of it, the maintenance of it, and also kind of a regulation of the entire system, because it could get a little crazy with designers going rogue and kind of doing their own thing. When that happens, the app or the product that you guys are designing for gets a little inconsistent, and it makes it for a very hard user experience or like difficult user experience if everything is just has their own kind of like design, right? And when I talk about components, I'm talking about things like buttons on a page that has to look consistent. You can't have, you know, a different color for your primary button or stuff like that. Text boxes, they have to be consistent because when you're filling out a form, you don't want anything to look out of place. Drop downs, menus, and stuff like that. And with each component, there's also an element of knowing how to use it, because with UX design, you're kind of building your interaction with these components. And that needs to all be documented for the designers, right? So as a design systems designer, I'm not designing a product, I'm designing for other designers. I'm doing it so that it's easy for them to know how to use a text box, teaching them or knowing when to use a drop down versus a select, stuff like that. So it's basically how a user interacts with each component is something that needs to be also researched and validated. You would assume that they would go in a certain way, but in reality, a lot of the users are not as intuitive as you are when you're designing. I like this quote. It says, I think it was a national park ranger who was like, why is it so difficult? Or why are the trash cans so complicated? And it's because there's an overlap between the smartest bears and the dumbest tourists. And that's kind of how you design for UX. Not to knock our users, but you got to kind of have to make sure that it's very intuitive for them, right? So design systems is what helps that foundation for other designers to know this has been tested and this is why a text box is used in a certain way. Okay, so if you are interested in design systems, in the next slide, you'll see a few examples in the wild. Carbon has a really great design system. Microsoft also has a pretty good design system. For any digital product, there is most likely, like popular digital product, there's most likely a design system that's free to explore. So there's that. And then in the next slide, if you really want to truly understand a really robust design system, Material Design's library of components is kind of like the holy grail of a design system, and most other design systems are really based on Material's foundation. Okay, so the next topic we're going to talk about is product design. So product design is a whole other type of UX design from design systems. Like I said earlier, product design is user facing. So you're designing for the users of your product. They're the ones building the apps and working with developers and product managers to help create and improve workflows of the product as a whole. And this is what an idealistic team looks like. So you'll be working with a product manager. They're kind of like your design director, I guess, of like where they want this product to go, kind of like the overview picture of what the users are, what like bringing in the users, what is it? Best interest and what they want to experience in the app, and also business goals, right? So they have that in mind. Product designer is you, or potentially you. Data analysts, they're the ones who, data analyst, who is a data analyst? Lisa, help me out.
Someone who analyzes data.
So it's basically, I think, when a product is shipped, right? They kind of have to analyze if what they built is going well. And that's also part of the QA engineer. QA is also quality and assurance engineer, and they're the ones who kind of make sure that what's built is working. Software engineers are the people who are building your app. UX researcher is kind of like bringing the users into the forefront of like, are you building this for the user or are we just building it just to build it? So it's kind of putting them into check of like, you know, what you're building is what the users want. And then a UX writer is also someone who makes sure that the language is being used is something that resonates with the users. So you kind of have to know your audience for that. So that's what is on a team. However, in reality, I don't know what I do. And there's usually only a product manager, a product designer, and a software engineer. So as a product designer, you kind of have to wear a lot of hats. You're the UX writer, you're also the UX researcher in some cases, and you're also sometimes you do also step into the role of product manager. So that's kind of like the reality of what's going on. And so in a product design team, there's a few different processes that you'll need to be familiar with. This was all new to me when I stepped into UX. I know you guys are familiar with the graphic design process. You research, you have a design brief, you sketch it out, you concept it, you finalize it, and then you develop it and you create the guidelines or, you know, the marketing materials and all that. There is a similar design process in product, which is called waterfall. And this is basically very similar to, oh, sorry, can you go to the next slide? Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, yeah, so you guys are familiar with this design process. And so the next slide, you'll see a similar process to that, which is waterfall. Basically, it's like before you go to the next step, the step before has to be finalized. So before your concepting, you have to get the sketches done and approved, and you go to the concepting, that has to be done and approved, and then you have to build it, and that has to be, or code it, and you have to have all of that done. So it's every requirement is clearly defined, but it is a very strict process. And the kind of negative effects from this is that it does get a little costly depending on how long each phase goes. So not a lot of places usually do the waterfall design process. What they do is the next slide, which is called an agile process. And this is something that is talked about a lot in tech. And it's basically the design process, but in a loop. So what will happen is you'll plan, you'll design, you'll test it out, you'll deploy it, and then it'll go for review, and then it'll launch, and then you kind of have that launch, see how it goes, test it with the users, and then go back into planning and designing and improving it every step. So it's kind of when you're, each little cycle is kind of called a sprint, and it depends on your team how long that sprint goes. There could be sprints that are a week, and there could be sprints that are like a month. This one is a lot more, as it's called, agile. So it's a lot more loose, and it's not really rigid. But there is an intense team collaboration. So you have to be on top of like talking to your developers and being in the loop and making sure that things are being referenced really well from your designs. So that's kind of what you'll expect in a product team in a tech company. If you guys do go to this through this route of UX design, these are a few things that you want to get familiar with. First is Figma. So Figma is the Figma is the product that most likely every tech company uses. So it's like graphic design. You're all familiar with Adobe. You're in UX, it's Figma. It's very intuitive. It's free for everyone. So if you want to just have like a trial, you can probably do like 2 or 3 projects in there for free. Get yourself familiar with this. It's the leading design app for products. I put some links in here. I don't know if you guys are sending out the.
Yeah, we'll be able to share it with everyone.
Okay, yeah. So in the hopefully you can click into the PDF and link it out. But Figma provides a lot of resources into learning how to use Figma. It provides a lot of resources in design systems as well. Is that, and then another app that you want to be familiar with in working in tech is Jira, which is a subproduct of Atlassian. It's mostly used by your developers or engineers, but it's good if you know how to at least use it a little bit to kind of be on top of what your engineers are designing. So learning how to write a task or write a ticket in a Jira app is very good to kind of familiarize yourself with. I think Jira also has a YouTube that has a lot of like intro on how to use it. And then the next one would be product board. And this is more so for product managers to kind of keep timelines and roadmaps in check. And then, so you'll find that designers are kind of the go-between product managers and developers. So you're kind of like the liaison of like making sure that you're designing what the product manager wants and making sure that the engineers are building what you're designing. So you're kind of the middleman there, kind of, you know, making sure that you're following the roadmaps and product board, but also making sure that you're following the tickets in Jira. So those are things that I would recommend to get familiar with. Other tech companies do probably use another app other than product board to kind of capture roadmaps, but that's just what I'm familiar with. And so the next one would be, if you do want to go into UX design, I would recommend understanding the heuristics of usability. And you guys are familiar with like the heuristics of the principles of design, right? So like hierarchy, balance, white space, all that stuff. For UX design, it's a little different. You're making sure that things are consistent. Visibility of system status. So it's like you don't want to keep your users in the dark. You always want to give like feedback of like why it's throwing an error and stuff like that. So definitely recommend understanding it. There's different resources, but NN Group is a great place to kind of understand a lot of like components and patterns because they're backed by user research. So their guidelines are they're kind of like the guideline for guidelines on components. So they have 10 usability heuristics, but there are other places that have like 12. So you can probably search it up and find whatever works for you. As far as design systems, this really helped me understand how design systems are presented in UX design, and atomic design pretty much breaks it down into kind of a more digestible way. So basically, your design system components, they're the atoms of a molecule, right? So it's like it's the colors, it's the typography, it's, you know, the spacing and all that. Those are the atoms of it. Molecules are your buttons, your text boxes, and all that. And then it just goes on from there. So understanding design systems, I would recommend this book. It's free online to read. So you can check that out. And then another great resource for kind of like examples of how people tackle UX design. They're called, so how you present like your work for graphic design is what UX design calls like when you present like your process of how you got to this concept and what it looks like at the end. What they call that in UX is case studies. So you'll find a lot when you work in UX that they just have new terminology for the stuff that you're already familiar with, right? So that's helped a lot. You just have to kind of connect the dots. Instead of showing your process, you're showing your case studies, right? So this site has a lot of great case studies that you can, examples that you can look at. So definitely recommend that. And then this one is also another great site for case studies, casestudy.club. They have some examples in there. And then I want to talk about how I kind of got the job that I have currently in UX design. So, or even any of the jobs that I have had before, like it says up there, landing any job is 30% the work you show, 20% vibes, and 50% who you know, right? So it's 20% vibes is kind of like a lot of companies nowadays want to interview you to just see how you are as a person, to see if you fit within the company. It's awful, but it's true. So it's definitely, you know, how you present yourself. And for me, it was definitely 50% who I knew. So I want to emphasize the importance of networking. The world of design careers is very much dependent on who you know. So I would recommend to take any opportunity to like create connections with people. And just know that how you present yourself during like this program or at your internships, your reputation is everything, because that's how people will remember you, right? Like I haven't spoken to, like I don't speak to some of my my cohort daily, but they still remembered me from school and would recommend me to apply for this job, right? So it's very much how you present yourself, what your reputation is, that people will remember and will be like, hey, this job opening is coming and I know the perfect person for this, right? And that could be you if you give that like impact. Another way to network is to start personal projects. It's a great way to keep in touch with your peers and colleagues through like posting on your social media and sending out a snail mail. Well, actually, before that, so know and establish your worth is one thing that I also want to emphasize. Don't undermine your experiences. That's one thing that definitely prevented me from applying to a lot of jobs, because I didn't think that I had those experiences, like technically, but from your schoolwork, from your internships, those are all easily applied to, you know, all of the jobs that are out there now. You just have to kind of look for it, right? Like, I didn't think that I would be cut out for UX design, but I figured that the way that I do my work in print is pretty much very transferable to UX design, right? So definitely don't have that intimidate you, and then just know that your experiences are valid and that they will always help you out, like in your jobs. But let's go to the next slide for personal projects. So another way to network is to kind of keep in touch with your peers, right? So I had done like a personal project of mine to just, I wanted to explore different styles of hand lettering or calligraphy. So I just made a personal projects of different ways to write the word butt. You have jump in the truck, you have booty, all in different stylings of writing. And it was just a fun thing that I did on my end. But what I did was I created buttons for it, buttons. And I sent them out to a lot of my cohort in the program, people that I didn't really talk to daily, but I just wanted to keep in touch and like let them know like, hey, you know, this is just something fun I did. I just want you to have it. Or I made like sea creature cards one day that like I just decided to make for Valentine's, and I sent it all out to friends and colleagues. And through that is where people were reminded that like, oh yeah, this person, she gave me buttons. They were amazing. I want to hire her for like calligraphy, like for calligraphy work for my wedding, something like that, right? So it's kind of just doing personal passion projects is really fun, and just like posting on Instagram about of your work is also a form of like keeping in touch with your colleagues and all that. So yeah, any questions? No?
Yeah, actually, do have a question.
Oh yeah.
So in your beginning, you had a lot of talked about sort of having a lot of analog projects, and you transitioned into full UI or UX, which is like almost completely digital, if not 100%. So
Yeah.
is there any like skills that you learned from analog that you were able to take over into more of that digital?
Yeah. So I think it was the creative problem solving for it. So it's like I would have an idea in my head. And let's say it was that Tom DeLuca. If you go to slide 4, it's that Tom DeLuca poster. Oh, next. Yeah. So the one on the far left. So I had a vision of that in my mind, and I could totally just replicate that through digital means, right? But it was kind of being able to kind of figure out how to do that in analog was kind of a way for me to think in a different way of how to produce the same result. And so because of that, I was able to transfer that to UX design, because with UX, you're given a set of you're given a set of components, and you're given, you know, like a workflow that you need to have for the user. And there's a very structured way to do it, or there's a way where it's easier for the user, and you're kind of problem solving in that sense. You're kind of creatively trying to make sure that the workflow is not just great for a first-time user, but also a very experienced user. So for me, it was the creative solutions, the things that kind of carried on into that, into UX design. I think another way to get the same result, right? Questions? Anyone interested in UX design? Nice. Design systems design? Yeah? Pretty awesome. I love it. But yeah, definitely recommend those resources to kind of check out. Get very familiar with Figma.
Follow-up question.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what
yeah.
is like the biggest piece of advice for someone who's trying to get into UX? What's like the biggest piece of advice you could give them for either getting started or finding jobs in that field?
Get yourself some friends who are already in UX. No. That's how I got into it. Some advice. I would say be very open to kind of relearning everything, because you're learning the same things, but in kind of a new situation. Because like I said, like a lot of the work that I did before is basically what UX design is, just kind of wrapped up in a new way. So, but it did feel like I was kind of relearning design again, just in a kind of different perspective. So I would say be open to learning all of that, because it seems like so, how do you say it? It seems so common sense with the way that like things are designed. You would think, oh, that makes so much sense. But when you're in it, you're kind of like, oh, like I would never have thought of it that way, kind of thing. So very much like you're kind of relearning everything, and just a new mindset. Just be open to. Don't feel like you're kind of left behind. At least that's how it felt, because I felt like I was starting something new, but I really wasn't. It was just kind of learning the same thing again, but in a new light. Just take everything in, because it feels new, but you'll find that it's a little similar or familiar in a sense.
Working in US with like engineers and software people, what's the biggest like difference in mindset or like point of contention you have or have noticed between the engineers and the designers, or is there like points of contention?
Engineers will build what they want to build. You can have the most specced out, specific design with steps and workflows, and they'll just be like, oh, it's close enough. So you kind of have to be on top of it, but not really. It's definitely a delicate balance of like making sure that you're on top of it to like, hey, could you like make this 8 pixels and not 16 pixels? And you kind of have to deliver it in a way that's not offensive to them, because they are a little, I mean, I wouldn't say they're fragile, but they're very set in like, they know, they're very set in like, oh, what are you talking about? It's fine, it's functional. Because they're very much a functional mindset. If it works, then that's good. But they don't understand that like things need to be consistent and things need to be not looking weird, because that's all the users will see, right? The users won't care if it works or not. The users will will definitely point out if a button is like slightly off. Like let's say you're scrolling and you want to go next, but if it shifts on the next screen, users are gonna get so irritated. But it's like in the engineering sense, it's like, what are you talking about? The button's there, they can press it. So it's like, it's very much a delicate balance of how you communicate with them. So it's, I would say learn how to communicate to someone who's very logical. But most engineers are pretty cool. Like I was also intimidated in talking to them, but a lot of them are very, very nice.
How hard to like kind of tell it to each other? How do you get inspiration for creating personal projects? And then how do you know which personal projects are ready to share or to use? Maybe not really, but appropriate to share for experience.
Yeah. So that's funny because I don't really set a goal for me to do a personal project. All my personal projects that you've seen here has basically stemmed from just like I just want to write the word "but" today, you know? And then from that, I was like, it would be a cool idea to like maybe write booty in a different way, you know? So it was more like I kind of just started it. There wasn't really like a point of inspiration. I think a lot of it stems from me just trying to learn a new skill is where the inspiration comes from. So yeah, so it's like when I did like the illustration stuff, it's just me wanting to learn how to illustrate in this type of style. And so that's where like some of my personal projects would stem out of. So I guess, yeah, that was my inspiration, was to teach myself a new skill and then just present that. So I would say things that are worthy, that's super subjective because
Maybe choosing what's appropriate to show.
what's appropriate to show.
Or how do you make that decision?
I kind of just, whatever I like, I just show. Yeah, it's like, I mean, if it's inappropriate, then, you know, like, I have ones where there's a curse word in it. It's like, yeah, like, I like it, I'll show it. If someone's offended, then, like, I don't do anything too offensive, right? So it's I don't know. Yeah, I kind of just show what I
That's really cool.
Okay. I was like, I don't know if I ever really regulate what I show. There are some times where I'm just like, I don't really like how this looks and I'm gonna share it. But you know, some things are like, oh, this is cute, I'll share it. It's not really a mindset I go through to like, yeah, okay, which one? I don't really post too often too, so I stopped my learning a new skill, so that's why I haven't posted anything. Any other questions? Yes.
I've been using Adobe XD for like 4.5 years. How similar is Figma to Adobe XD? Like, are there skills that are transferable? Because I do want to switch to Figma because everyone uses, like, that's the industry standard. But I'm so comfortable with XD, and I don't know.
Yeah.
You know,
I can't help you there because I've never touched XD.
I would learn Figma sooner rather than later because XD goes offline next year.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
I was
that's
gonna,
why
like,
that's
stop
my
it.
big concern.
I've never touched XD. So I can't really gauge which one, like what the difference is, but
Rest in peace.
yeah, XD I've never tried it. It's basically Figma. And it's great because Figma is so intuitive and it's basically like the Apple of like programs to use because nothing's really new. It's super easy to use, very user friendly, and you know, it's very much not as intimidating as like picking up Photoshop if you've never picked up Photoshop, right? So it's, I would say, get started now. Watch all the YouTube tutorials that Figma has. Figma is so great because they have their own like intro on how to make components or intro on how to create like an animation and all that. So very great resource, and I can't advertise enough for Figma. They should hire me as a representative, like give me a PR gift or something. But super easy to use. Yeah. my gosh, yes.
Now that you're in UX, do you see yourself staying there for the foreseeable future, or do you have anything else in mind that you would like to do?
I personally love UX. So despite what my portfolio shows of all the illustrations and designs that I've done, like I said, I really enjoyed more the process of creating designs and less about the final result of it. So getting to learn how to build components was like such a moment for me, because that's kind of what made me fall in love with design systems. Yeah, I don't think I'll go back to. Are you trying to coach me back into the lab? No, just kidding. No, yeah, for me, it just got exhausting creatively for me to kind of like make something that's super awesome and like I love this illustration. You know, it was too much, and I was more appreciative of like the research behind things, the concepting, the connecting the dots, and using that to kind of not have to produce like a visually appealing thing, but more so a functional thing that is designed in a way that's easy for the user, is kind of like what I love more so than the final beautiful poster that's created. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Let's give her a round of applause.
And if you guys ever want to reach out to me, Instagram is great. I'll reply to that. Yeah. Don't hesitate. I'm always available for answers.
And we'll be posting the slides, so you guys are going to be able to get all the resources. It's going to go up on our Discord server. So if you're not in that, join that. Grab all those great resources. Definitely don't want to pass that up. But otherwise, give Dan another round of applause. Thank you for coming.
Informative for everyone.
Very informative. Thank you. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. If you have any more questions, you know where to hit her up at. But if not, we have a good day tomorrow. So bring in your stuff. We'll take a look at it, give some feedback. But if not, we'll see you when we see you. Have a good rest of your night. And take care, everyone. Get some sleep. Yeah. Don't point it out. Oh my gosh.
If anyone wants to see my notebooks, they are here for everyone to see. If you want to download what I've done at the lab.